Welcome to Pathfinding. Hello and welcome to Pathfinding. Okay, so in my last video I gave a channel update and I talked about how I hadn't uploaded for quite some time, quite some months actually. And I gave the reasons, not an excuse, a reason that I was being too much of a perfectionist and I had all these talk ideas in various stages of development, but it takes a long time to structure not just the script but the graphics and all those things. And some part of me was reluctant to do the videos because I do a lot of setup, and by the time it's all set up I feel a bit stressed out. So I've just decided to steam ahead and just talk extemporaneously. And yeah, there's some worry that I'll talk on a certain topic and I'll miss out so many important things I wanted to include, but if you don't even make a video, you don't include anything. So I'm just going to jump in on various topics, and then later on I can start to redo them with better presentation. So today I'm going to talk about something that, well, I talked about in my first video, which is mechanics. And I'm going to explain what that means exactly. So in my very first video, when I introduced this channel, I talked about how the emphasis of this channel, whether I'm talking about scientific things, psychological things, anthropology, evolution, or metaphysical things, or even philosophical and spiritual things, is to always drill down to the mechanics of it. Sometimes a related topic might be boiling things down to its essential elements or first principles. But mechanics is a little bit more of a different approach. And part of the reason why I want to look at the mechanics of something is because I feel like when you understand how something works, you're more going to understand its purpose, and more importantly, you're going to understand its value to you and its utility to you. And so, for example, this channel, we're not always going to focus on the Bible or spiritual things or God or even metaphysics. Sometimes, for example, I have an upcoming talk about the principles of energy, and I have an upcoming talk about why we evolve the capacity for pain, anxiety, and depression. Another one is talking about why we evolved the capacity for anger, aggression, and violence. So it's a mix, because on this channel we see everything as interconnected, or more importantly, as having the same root design, whether it's a spiritual thing or a physical thing, or even a design thing like psychology, the way psychology works. They're all expressions of the same originating principles. And so that's why in many of my talks, if I'm discussing a spiritual thing, I'll reference something in nature or in science as an example of that same principle, and vice versa. And so I find that when we understand how something functions, what the core mechanical principles of things are, we can understand it on a deeper level. And if I was addressing an audience that was interested in metaphysics or spirituality, or especially in understanding the Bible, you know, I have some talks on my channel about the scientific meaning of the flaming sword in the Bible, and I have plenty of talks like that in various stages of development. But I find that there's a way of thinking about things, an approach to things, which really blocks understanding. And in fact, I'll probably do a talk on this later, but I'm actually in the early stages of writing a whole book on the topic of certain modes of Christian thinking which inhibit their ability to understand even things in the Bible. And so the way I've understood it is there are three levels of approach to things related to God and the Bible and what you might call God's providence, including the prophets and the great stories and leading all the way up to Jesus and Christianity. There's a level of understanding things in terms of the miraculous, miracles. And we can see that leading up to the time of Moses. So everything was about God just doing things by miracles, even including when God led the Israelites out of Egypt. You know, the Red Sea was parted by miracles, and there's the 10 plagues before that. And then even when they went into the desert, and even later in Canaan, there's examples of things happening just by miracles. And then people see that this God is powerful because he can do miracles, which is kind of like doing magic. And so they believe based on miracles. And of course, that also leads to an expectation that that's how things are done, miracles. if you're in your town and you want to get access to water, you have to dig a well and do all the mechanical things needed. But when God wants to deliver water, he has his prophet whack a rock with a stick and water just comes out. And so that kind of miracle thinking leads to a kind of, you might say, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but it leads to an infantile way of thinking, that things just happen, they just come about. And then after the time of Moses, and as we see in the book of Leviticus, God started to transition people away from just the miracles to the law. And so it started with the Ten Commandments. And now it's no longer, you should follow me or do this because I'm great and powerful and I can do miracles, or expect everything to come about because of miracles. Now God is introducing rules for life, and starting with the Ten Commandments and then all the other hundreds of laws written out in Leviticus and some, I think, in Deuteronomy as well, for the Israelite people to follow. So now we've reached a point where there's still miracles, but now we've reached a point where they're doing everything because that's the rules, that's the law. And the rule giver, the law giver, is the maximally great being in the universe, Almighty God. So that law has authority behind it. But in some ways, it's still a childlike way of thinking about things and doing things. Because after all, if there's a law, there must be a lawgiver. And if it's the same lawgiver that did all those miracles, then you better think twice before breaking the laws. There's going to be consequences. But to a certain degree, there's still a certain lack of taking responsibility to that, personal responsibility, because the idea is that, well, I don't even have to understand the law, I just have to obey it. And then I just do my duty and I obey these laws, and now I'm justified because of obedience. And I followed the laws and I get the good result. But that's a transitionary phase. It's a little bit like when parents tell their little children, you have to brush your teeth every morning. The children might say, why? And the parents might say, because I said so. Or they might give a vague concept of, it's good for you. So the children do as they're told and they brush their teeth. But there reaches a point in their life where they're no longer brushing the teeth because they were told to by an external force. They're brushing their teeth because they really do understand the concept of oral hygiene and tooth decay and preventing that. And obviously it's habit forming, and they develop a preference for having a fresh mouth. And so, but once they reach the point where they not only understand the mechanics of why you have to brush your teeth, but also they unite with the idea, they also agree with, I want that result. Then they're understanding why they have to brush their teeth because of mechanics, not because it's the law. And it's the same with nutrition. Parents tell their children not to eat too many sweets and to give them healthy food. And initially the children do it because they're told to. They do as they're told. But there reaches a point where they come to understand nutrition. And, well, mainly because once they get to a certain age, they're able to break those rules or break those commands and eat junk food. And then they see the actual mechanical results on their body and in their energy levels and just in their general feeling about themselves. And they come to an understanding, yeah, those rules of nutrition have a mechanical meaning behind them. If I eat junk food, I'm going to get unhealthy and be uncomfortable and not be happy about myself. And if I eat healthy food, there's going to be a different mechanical effect on my body, and I'm going to be healthy and full of energy and look good and feel good. And so, through trial and error, inductive wisdom is gained, and they follow the good nutrition habits because of an understanding of the mechanics, and not because it's a rule anymore, and definitely not because of some miracle. So in religious history, especially through Judaism and then Christianity, people started out thinking in terms of miracles, and the one who could do the miracles obviously is the one to worship because they're more powerful. And then they, for example, at the time of Elijah, there was a lot of tribes in Israel falling into idol worship. And so Elijah had a big contest against all the false prophets of Baal, and he had them build a giant fire, a big bonfire. And then he built a big bonfire. And he had them call on their God to do a great miracle and to light the fire spontaneously. And nothing happened, obviously. And then Elijah said, "No, I'm going to call on our God." And then he even had his servants go and get huge buckets of water from the lake or the sea and douse the wood so it's even more difficult to light. And then he prayed, and God did a miracle and burst the bonfire into flames. And so there we see an example of faith motivated by miracles, by witnessing miracles or even experiencing miracles. And and then, then by the time Jesus arrives in Israel, we have a society that really takes the law seriously. So that's great. They've moved on from just the expectation of miracles, that infantile view where just God will just do everything, into taking a bit of responsibility to following the law. But then Jesus is wanting to, move them onto another level, and that's really part of the motivation for me having this channel, is to get people to think about the mechanics of everything, no matter how holy it might seem, no matter how ethereal, or no matter how magical. Actually, there's a mechanics behind everything. Let's take, for example, love. We think of love as not something physical, even though it might have certain hormones and neurotransmitters in your body. But actually, love is something spiritual, right? And we just think of love as, like the Beatles song, "All you need is love." But actually, love has very strict rules, very, very strict operational principles behind it. And there's a mechanical structure to love. And love is actually a substantial thing. One thing I've learned in my spiritual life, which, to be honest, over 40 years, it's gone up and down and up and down, always questioning, always having some doubt here and there, but always retesting and re-experiencing and confirming. So I have super strong faith that God is real. But at the times, maybe the rare times, when I've really made a lot of effort, prayed deeply every day and studied scripture and made an effort in my life, and over weeks and weeks of doing that, sometimes you can really feel close to God. And in those moments, when you really feel God's love, sometimes you can have a kind of an epiphany about things. And one epiphany I had is that love is a real thing. It's actually a substantial thing. It might not be in the physical dimensions, or it's not substantial in that way. But when you really feel sensitive to God's love, and the love of others, you can feel it like it's a real substantial thing. And you can feel it coursing through your spirit. And same with connection. We think of a connection as a conceptual thing. That's my brother, that's my sister, that's my friend, that's God. But actually, connection itself is also a real substantial thing. And you can reach a point where you actually feel that, for example, love is more real than the physical things around you. That sounds a bit crazy, but if you think about it, matter is not actually real. It doesn't actually exist. We talk about the different states of energy or matter. Now, when we think about energy, are we talking about, is energy physical? We tend to think of energy as this sort of nebulous midway point between what some people might think of as spiritual on the other dimension or physical. But actually, if you consider what matter is all matter is made up of molecules and atoms. And in fact, your body, if you're an average sized person, has 7,000 times more atoms than there are stars in the universe. And if every atom in your body were to be laid out in a single line, it would stretch for 70,000 light years. So there's a lot of atoms in your body. And every one of those atoms is made up of a proton, which is like the heart, the core of the atom, and an electron, which spins around it. And when all the atoms in your body, or anything in fact, touch each other or come into contact, they never actually touch each other. The electrons would smash into each other. They never actually touch each other. If you've seen the sci-fi movies like Star Trek, when enemies fires at the ship, the Romulans fire a torpedo at the Enterprise ship, it doesn't damage it because the Enterprise has this glowing energy field around it, right? It's like a repulsion energy field. The shield's up, right? And so actually, that's what every atom has. Every atom has an electrostatic resistance field around it. So you've got the proton and the nucleus and the electron spinning around it. But there's like an atmosphere, just like there is around the Earth, an electromagnetic atmosphere around the atom. And that's the electrostatic resistance field. So just like the north of two magnetic norths coming together and repulsing each other, when two atoms come together, that electrostatic resistance field doesn't allow them to get any closer. They push away, unless they're in a particle accelerator or the heart of the sun where there's so much pressure, they overcome that resistance field and loop into a new, larger, more complex atom, heavier atom. But so what happens in the physical world is all these atoms have a resistance, so they push against each other, away from each other, they resist each other. But there's nothing physical involved in that resistance, it's just two energy fields. In the same way that if you get two big magnets and put north and north together and push them together, you can't feel anything physical. All you can feel is the resistance of that magnetic field. We don't really know what a magnetic field is, but it's not a physical thing. But you feel something substantial, don't you, from that repulsion. So your body is full of trillions upon trillions of atoms that are all experiencing that. And when you touch any part of your body or anything physical, what you're actually experiencing is energy fields repulsing each other. You're not feeling matter. You might say knock on wood, or you might feel like this is substantial, I can feel it. But actually, like for example, I use this to make sure my camera's level. This little spirit level, I can't feel it. When I push it and it moves away, it's moving away because the electrostatic resistance field, the energy field in the atoms in the tip of my finger, are resisting the energy field in the atoms in this spirit level and pushing it away. There's nothing actually physical. Physical is just a concept. Matter is just a concept our brain creates to help us understand things. In the same way that there's no such thing as up, right? Up or down. There's only away and towards. But we think of up, even locally, like I'm in England, but to an Australian people, up is a completely different direction. There's no such thing as suction, actually. When you're vacuuming your apartment, you're cleaning your carpet, or when you're in space and, in the movies, somebody fires a gun in a spaceship and it punctures a little hole in the spaceship, and the person, the bad guy gets sucked out into space. And then we say sucked out into space. There's no such property in space that sucks on anything. What happens is the air pressure, all the air inside the spaceship, all squashed like springs, and now there's a different pressure because there's no pressure on the outside, so the springs all push out, and he gets pushed out to space by by the air pressure. So there's no such thing as suction. There's no such thing as pulling even. Can you believe that? We think, I'm pulling this car by this rope, or strongest man in the world is pulling a train by pulling on this rope, or pulling on this chain. If you think about it, every link in the chain, the part of the link which is having a force effect on the other link is behind it. And so when you're pulling the chain, that link is pushing against that train. And when you're pulling on a rope, you're not actually pulling. The friction in your hand and the grip is pushing the part of the rope it's holding on to. So there's no such thing as pushing, there's only pulling. And there's no such thing as black, right? We have substances that are black like paint, but there's no such thing as black light. There's just an absence of light. And then our brain conceptualizes that as something that we think of it as black. In fact, your visual cortex in your brain doesn't just leave an empty space where there's no light coming in. It actually creates something that creates the illusion of something called black. So there's every color in the spectrum, plus white, which is all the colors. Black is just an absence of color. But we create these concepts in our head to help us conceptualize. Just like there's no such thing as infinity. There isn't such a thing as something, there's an infinity of something or an infinity of time. You might have never ending or not yet ended time or something, but there's no such thing as infinity, but we create this concept in our head to help us understand. And it's the same with matter. There's no such thing as matter. There's only configurations of energy which have an effect. So all these atoms in our body become molecules which engage in a chemical process and become proteins and more complex structures until it creates the most complex structure in the entire universe, which is the human brain. And the human brain is so sophisticated, it can process thought and abstract concepts and create an illusion of vision and sound in your brain, and your mind and your eternal spirit relate to that. And so what's presented to your mind by your brain is some part illusions. For example, when you look at somebody, you don't see them. Your eyes catch the light that bounces off them, translates it into electrical signals, then your brain draws a picture of that person. And your mind looks at that picture. But it's such an accurate representation, even though it's an illusion, we take it as real. You're not looking at me right now, you're looking at a representation of me on your computer screen or your phone screen. But that creates an accurate and trustable, reliable illusion. So it doesn't matter to you that you're not actually looking at me. And so in the same way, everything our body experiences in the natural world, or even within itself, is sent to our brain in the term of signals, electrical signals. And our brain recreates that experience in the brain, and the mind experiences that facsimile of that real thing. But even that real thing, it's all made up of atoms and subatomic particles. And if an atom is basically the electrical field around it, and the proton and electron inside it is the engine that creates that electric field, what we experience of matter is just configurations of opposing electrical fields. And so we get inside our mind and inside our brain this sensation of something being substantial. And what we say when we mean matter, we really mean something physical or substantial. But actually, there is nothing physical or substantial. It's all energy. But this energy has the capacity where it can have a different configuration, and then it opposes itself, it pushes against itself. So it's two energy fields, not two pieces of matter. And so, if we go all the way down that, we look at the proton and the electron, it's the same thing, it's just configurations of energy. So all there really is energy. And then, if you're a believer in God, there's spiritual things such as love and God. And that's why, I almost forgot my train of thought there, but that's why when you really experience love in your internal eternal soul, and you experience God's love, or even love with other people, that's why you can reach a point where you realize it's more real and more substantial than what we think of as matter, as the real world. Because when you understand that matter is just energy configurations that we process a certain way in our brain, in the same way that there's no such thing as color, right? Light bounces off objects and it changes the frequency of the light. It's just a frequency, but our brain explains that frequency to us in terms of red, green, blue, etc. But there isn't actually red, green, and blue out there. It's only a way our brain helps us to conceptualize. So love is something real, and because it's something real and something substantial, it has rules and it has a mechanics to it, right? It functions in a certain way. And so, yeah, when we look at mechanical things like my mobile phone or a car or a bicycle, yeah, we think of that as real and something that's matter, something that's substantial. And so we respect the mechanics of it. We don't think the bicycle works by magic. Although, if you show technology like a phone or a plane to somebody from a primitive to society or in the past, they would think it's magical because they don't understand the mechanics of it. When we experience things in the physical world, we have no problem respecting the fact that there's mechanics to it. But when we experience things such as God's love or love in relationships, or even conceptualize things such as the eternal soul or the principles by which we live a good spiritual life, we tend to take them not as seriously, and we tend to think of them in terms of either miracles or in terms of just rules we have to follow. So a Christian, even though a Christian has sort of transcended the Jewish or Judaism's focus on rules to obey and follow, a Christian might, for example, Dennis Prager, who's a famous Jewish teacher and radio host in America and works with Daily Wire and those guys, and Jordan Peterson, he makes an interesting point that Jewish people believe that, and I don't know if he speaks for all Jewish people, but that Jewish people believe that as long as you don't physically do a sin, then if you think about a sin, then there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas Jesus obviously said, it's not enough that you don't commit adultery. Even if you think about committing adultery, you've committed a sin. I don't think he means if it just the thought passes through your head. I mean, if you covet, well, it's kind of contradictory because the actual Old Testament does say don't covet, right? But I think they have a different meaning of that. But so the Christian view would be that if you covet another man's wife and spend a lot of time thinking about her and imagining you laying with her or even seducing her, then you're committing a sin. And I think that's because Jesus understood, obviously, that that internal things and spiritual things and things like love and emotions are real and they have a mechanical structure to them. So if somebody actually commits adultery with somebody else's spouse, they're mechanically doing something wrong and it's having an effect not just on their body, on their spirit. But even if you think about it, you're already configuring your whole state of mind and your spirit and your heart in a way that's destructive. So you've already committed a sin because sin is something which separates you from God by making you not compatible with God or not like God, right? And so basically with the Pathfinding channel, I'm trying to craft talks and give presentations to get through to people to move away from a reliance on miracles. Maybe people are not going to see miracles in their daily life, but just the understanding that miracles can happen and do happen and that God can do miracles. And even to move away from a reliance on understanding things just based on the law. Well, it's true because God said so, right? So it doesn't mean abandon those things, but grow beyond them. So for example, you can ask the question, when God says something like, don't cheat on your spouse, don't commit adultery, does God say it because it's bad, or is it bad because God says it? I would say that God says it because he's bad. God knows how to live. He is the template for all goodness, but he's the template because he knows how to configure himself and to never stray from that. God isn't just helplessly made that way. I think God is a being that's just as free as we are. And even though he would never, God in theory could sin. But God never chooses to do that. And he knows the difference between good and bad. And so God knows what's good and what's evil. So when God says, do this good or don't do that evil, it's not the case because God said it. So if God reversed it and said, you know what, kill people, steal, sleep with your neighbor's wife, that wouldn't make it good just because God said it. That would make God wrong, actually. And so God says those things because they're right. They're not right because God says them. But you can take it as being right because God says it, because God would never encourage anybody to do evil. And so you can go so far by understanding things based on rules and the law. But when we mature and grow older, we want to understand things because of the mechanics of it. Because when we understand the mechanics of something, we take ownership of it. When children really learn the difference between, for example, when a child leaves home and lives by themselves or go to college or gets a job, they start becoming responsible for their own flat or their own apartment or even their own house. When they're children, they're told, clean your room, and they do it because they're told to. But when they have an experience living by themselves, they're completely free. They can either clean their room or not clean it. And when they experience living in filth and untidiness, they get sick of it after a while and have a good cleanup. And by the way, this is a great tip if you're feeling down or even if you're feeling depressed. I know it's a cliche now because Jordan Peterson says clean your room, but actually, I actually saw a movie where this kind of like a homeless woman, and she advised somebody, if you're feeling down, just clean your apartment and you'll feel better. And it's true. When you clean your whole place and become nice and organized, you actually do feel uplifted and better. And so people can experience this when they first experience agency and living by themselves when they're young. They can They know the rules that you should clean your place, but of course, when it's their place, it's their rules, so they could make a rule to not clean it. And they experience living in a mess, and they experience living in a beautiful, tidy place where they can enjoy the environment. And that's like inductive wisdom. They experienced it and they learned it through experience. And so in that situation, they move beyond rules and laws. They move to a place where they have knowledge of the mechanics of something. The mechanics being, when all these surfaces and clothes and things are clean, I feel better. And also I'm actually healthier. And when everything's tidy and organized, I also feel better. Like me, I can't watch a movie unless I tidy the whole room, but that's not really a virtue, it's more of an OCD thing. If I see anything asymmetrical or out of place, I'm nuts. I have to clean and organize everything, then I can relax and watch the movie. But in general, people experience the reason, the mechanics of why it's good to do something. And, well, this is a whole nother talk I'm going to be giving, but real knowledge doesn't come about because you have a concept in your head. That's like a blueprint. Real knowledge comes about when you experience something. So that's why in the Bible, when it says the man knew his wife and they bore a son, right? Knowledge is used for, well, we even have the phrase today, carnal knowledge. It's to experience, a spouse experience each other. But it's not just about carnal knowledge. Knowledge can be anything. When you experience something, you get true knowledge. No matter how much it's explained to you, it's when you've actually experienced it that you really understand it. And when you experience the mechanics of something, you can really understand it. Even if you've been following the rules in adhering to something all your life, it's only when you actually get agency over it and experience the mechanics of it that you really understand. But and so that's why I came up with this way of explaining that people tend to think in upside down ways in many ways. For example, they tend to think everything is linear, either horizontally or vertically. But actually, a lot of things are circular. One example of that would be somebody might be overweight and they might want to lose weight. And so they'll go on a diet and they'll exercise. Good on them. It's great. And they'll go from a point where they're losing more weight. And well, let me do it horizontally. They're losing more weight and they're moving to this point where it's the ideal weight for their size. But in their mind, they just think weight lost equals good. So they just continue. And even though they've reached the ideal shape and weight for beauty and health, they continue to want to lose more weight. And it doesn't matter how much weight they lose, they want to lose more. So even though they pass that point, that apex point, they now start to get detrimental health, and even detrimental. If somebody's too skinny, it doesn't look that good. But they just think linear. They just think, well, if I move from the left to the right, no matter how much to the right I move, I'm doing better. But actually, it's more circular. So if 12 o'clock point is the peak health and peak attractiveness, and you're at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, you start to lose weight. You start to move towards the 12 o'clock point. But if you lose more weight, you start to go back down again because it's a circular thing and not a linear thing. And so we tend to think about that like that in many ways. So one thing people tend to do is they tend to think upside down. They tend to think magical process, logical result, right? So, for example, when you watch the Olympic skating and you see a figure skater jump and spin 3 times in the air and land perfectly, I guess it's called the triple axel. Sometimes the announcer might say something like, "That was effortless," right? But of course we know it wasn't actually effortless, right? They made it look effortless. But what we know is they spent months and months and even years getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going to the ice skating ring before school, practicing and being in pain and practicing and falling down and suffering. So they went through a logical process, a mechanical process to achieve a magical result. So it's not magical process, logical result. It's logical process, magical result. And if you look at children when they experience their childhood, especially if they have a happy family and a nurturing family, on the days that they have their birthday party, and there's little lanterns, coloured lanterns in the garden, and the beautiful presents, and everybody's in a present dress, and the parents prepared all this delicious food, and then their friends come and they get lots of love and attention, and they all play games. At the end of the night, before they go to bed, after everybody's gone home, the children might say to the parents, I wish it could be my birthday every day, right? Because they experience real magic. And it's not just an illusion. They experience love and the culmination of all the community happiness around them. And the children, the way they think about it is this stuff all just appeared. It just happened, right? One day I came home from school and it was birthday night, or it was a Saturday, and it's all just there. But in reality, we know that what happened was the parents went to college and they went to building a career and they developed finances, and they scrimped and saved and gave up on their dreams for other things so they could have enough money to create a great environment for their family and kids. And then even leading up to the birthday party, they made sure that they're not rich enough, they can't hire a cleaner. They kept the house clean every day, scrubbing and when the kids are sleeping, and then they wrapped the presents and bought the presents and cooked the food and did all the admin and picking up the other kids. So everything was a mechanical process, right? A logical process. And then the result of that was that the children got to experience magic. So it was logical process, magical result. But when we're younger or less mature in our thinking, we just see things just appear. So it seems like there is no mechanical process behind it. Magic just happens. That's how we develop a miracle thinking. And so in life, in many things, especially if in relating to our spiritual lives, if you're a person of faith, of any faith, we tend to focus on miracles and the legal and law. And so we tend not to think about things as being mechanical. And I understand that, because I'll give another anecdote. When I first went to college, I never graduated college because I was a horrible student, but when I first went to college when I was 17, I think, I took a psychology class. And in that class, there was a teacher who was talking about, actually he was talking about love, but in a kind of a cynical way. He was explaining how emotions happen and why they happen. And he was saying, well, basically you have these oxytocins and other hormones and neurotransmitters in your brain, and they just drug you. Your brain drugs itself, which is kind of true. And the brain just drugs itself, and the purpose is because your genes need to mix with somebody else's genes and procreate to create offspring. And so it basically manipulates you into doing that by making you feel this gaga feeling that you're in love or physical sexual attraction. And when I heard that, my 17-year-old brain, which hadn't yet come to faith, felt quite depressed that all we are is reduced down to a bunch of chemicals. I remember one teacher, even before I left high school, in the assembly, he gave a talk to the kids, and he was a chemistry teacher. And he basically said that, if you melt down the human body and all the different chemicals that results, the value of all those different chemicals are 78p. That was a long time ago. And maybe I'm misremembering. I only remember that part. Maybe he was trying to make the point that we're more than the sum of our parts, and that we're not just valued based on that. But that's the part I remembered. And so with the psychology teacher, yeah, he was just really trying to impress that we're just animals. Maybe he was an atheist, materialist, but he was trying to make the point that we're just animals. We're nothing special. It's just a bunch of chemicals arranged in a certain way. And so there is a danger that when you encourage people to understand the mechanics of how things work, even spiritual things, there is a danger that it could depress people. So you do have to be careful, because when you see things as miracle, everything that happens is just magical. It's a miracle. It's inspiring. And even when you see that there's a strict laws and a lawgiver, that's kind of maybe not inspiring, but it's actually quite comforting. That's why the experiment of the children's playground, where they had a fence all the way around the playground, the kids were very comforted by it, and they spread out evenly, and some played by the perimeter. But then they moved the fence, and the kids stayed away from the edges, because beyond the edges was a bit unsure, so they tend to clump in the middle. So when you live in an environment that's lots of rules and laws, as long as they're not completely suffocating, but it can be comforting to people. I remember I hated school. When the last day of my school, when I was 16, I left high school. It was great. I was so happy to be free of all those expectations and rules. But within a few years of becoming a bit of an otaku and living by myself, I actually fell into a bit of a depression. And even now, I often have I often have this recurring dream where it's like 6 weeks before high school graduation, and I feel really sad because I want to go back and study and really buckle down and study. And so somehow I hated school and all those expectations and rules, but some part of me must have appreciated that there was a value to them. And so, yeah, it's comforting, even if it's spiritually, to think of everything in terms of I'm just hands off. I don't need to get involved. All I need to do is find out what the rule is and just obey that rule. And then I go to heaven or good things happen. And in many cases, that can be true. Somebody could tell somebody what the speed limit is or what the nutrition rules are or all sorts of things. And as long as you follow them, you don't get into trouble and you don't even get mechanically bad consequences like driving too fast, crashing a car, or eating junk food. Just follow the rules. But if you really want to understand things on a deeper level, it's good to understand the mechanics of things. And so when we study the Bible, we can understand the mechanics. If we understand the mechanics of things, we can understand on a deeper level. And I'll give an example of engrafting. But before I do that, I should mention that, yes, it is dangerous to bluntly push people onto thinking in terms of mechanics only. Not only, thinking in terms of mechanics in a primacy way. Because if you move them away from the inspiration and motivation they get from either the comfort of the legal thinking or even the inspiration of the miraculous, it can leave them depressed. When I was a child, I used to roam around my small city of Wakefield, and sometimes I'd go through the woods or through the streets by myself or with friends. Sometimes we'd wander onto what we call a trading estate. I don't know what they call it in other countries. It's basically a massive area just full of warehouses and factories and manufacturing places. Lots of different businesses. And sometimes we'd sneak around and look in them, and they would just be like pipes. Or another one might just be like forklifts moving a bunch of pallets of stuff around. Or another one might be plumbing supplies. And they would always feel very dry and depressing and boring because there's nothing you can relate to them, right? There's nothing inspiring about looking at a box of plumbing supplies. And but if you go around shops where you see fruit in one shop and sweets in another shop and a music store, it's kind of more relatable and exciting. So I remember I used to feel a bit depressed walking through such places. Now I wouldn't be. Now I would be like amazed walking through those places because my understanding of supply chains and how everything works together and everything comes together, it would blow my mind just looking at a trading estate and seeing those different facets and just being able to visualize they'll all like come together and converge, and then you get these products, right? Or these houses that are made from all these different parts. But as a 10-year-old, I didn't understand that, so I just saw bits of metal and bits of plastic, and so sometimes if you just look at the mechanics of something alone, then it can be depressing because people feel detached and it's abstract and isolated. So encouraging people to understand the mechanics of things has to be done in a nuanced way and carefully. And because one thing I've realized is everything that's mechanical is bookended by miracles. For example, we don't actually know what God is made of, what our own soul is made of. We don't even know what light is, what gravity is. We don't even know what the strong and weak nuclear force is. We don't really know what electromagnetism is, or matter, or all those things. We have words to describe them, and we've observed their effects. But even the greatest scientists, they don't actually know what they are. And so, for all intents and purposes, the origin of everything we know, even physical and mechanical things, is, from our point of view at least, completely magical. And what we do with all those things in our life, the physical things and the structures and the processes, what we do with them also produces the end fruit is magical, like the children's birthday party. Or think about when a movie's made and you go and see that movie and you just experience 2 hours of magic and you come back completely invigorated and inspired by what was in the movie. The first time I had that experience was when I saw the movie by John Borman, Excalibur. First time I ever saw a movie twice in the movie. I went back to see it again. You know, King Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone and fighting all the bad guys, and it was just elevating. It just transported me. And so that is the magical result. But if you actually look at how a movie's made, it's an unbelievably complex process, and it's all mechanical, right? All the mechanics and the principles of how things work have to be mastered by these experts and all brought together by the directors and producers. And so reality, in the middle part, it's all mechanical, but it's bookended on both ends by magic. On the foundational side, everything that's coming from God, and there's everything that's at the existential nature, the ontological reality of the foundations of everything, at least from our point of view, is magical, because we just can't understand the mechanics of it. And then the end result, like happiness and love and inspiration and joy and satisfaction, all those positive things are actually magic, right? I mean, I can't see anything mechanical in them because I'm not smart enough to really understand or break them down, and maybe I wouldn't want to. But they're definitely magical. But in the middle part, there's a process to everything, and there's a structure to everything, and everything operates based on principles, and it's not just in the physical world. Like I'm using this microphone here, and you know it's transmitting. If you can see this, I'm going to hide my face so it focuses to this DJI transmitter, and yeah, there's a mechanical process and principles, and they're very exacting. Like if the engineers in the manufacturing process got even a tiny thing wrong, it just wouldn't work. And so in the middle, in everything we experience in life, in the physical world, there's mechanics. And that's what we do in science. We try to understand the mechanics of everything. But we abandon that approach when it comes to understanding spiritual things like love and relationships and God and how the spirit grows, why the spirit exists in a physical body for us. You know, it's a short duration of I don't know, maybe the duration is 75 years for the average person these days. And so all those things have actually a mechanical process. And so, yeah, I was going to give the example of engrafting. Engrafting is not a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing. When Jesus said you have to engraft to me, he's using a metaphor of a physical thing, but he's actually describing a spiritual process. And just to give you the context, the idea is that God is a being, right? And God created the physical world as a kind of like a nurturing nursery or a womb in which to gestate the spirit, eternal spirits of his children. So our spirits are placed in our bodies when we're babies. Maybe placed is the wrong word, because you could say that by that physical complexity of a human body, the physicality of it gives birth to the spirit. Who knows how it happens, but the baby gets a spirit, has a spirit, and that spirit dwells in that electrochemical experiential growth stage adapting mold of the physical body. And the physical body nurtures our spirit to grow and develop and structure itself. And then when that job is done, the body dies, and we go to the next dimension, which I call the third trimester, because I think of the universe as God's womb. First trimester is inside the mother's womb. Second trimester is your spirit is inside your physical body and the environment. The third trimester is what we call heaven, the afterlife, where you continue to grow and finish your development. But the idea is that God, the spirit of every human being, is actually a descendant of God, made from the same substance as God. That's why it says made in God's image. And so the first baby was Adam and Eve. That's another long story. It's not that Adam and Eve were the only Homo sapiens. It's that they were the ones that were spiritually refined enough to be able to really engraft to God. And then so the idea is Adam and Eve are created but spiritually born, and they're in God's lineage. And from them, every descendant will also be in God's lineage, like the branches of a tree, all connected. But more of a mesh net, because as you grow to maturity, you yourself engraft and connect directly to God, but you're also connected to your parents and indirectly to God through that. But in the beginning, you're mostly connected to your lineage and your parents, and through them nurturing you, you're able to directly connect to God. So a tree branching structure becomes a mesh net structure. I'll talk about that more in another talk. And so the idea is that Adam and Eve were pure, unfallen, unadulterated, and that they were God's children. But there's a difference between being perfectly pure and being perfect. Perfect just means, in the fallen world, we think of it as being saintly, but actually it just means to be complete, right? Just as your physical body, if you don't have genetic defects or health problems, your body becomes complete. But your spirit is born perfectly pure, ideally, but it has to grow. Just as your physical body is not fully, it's not complete when you're a baby. It needs to finish growing. It develops the fundamentals in the womb. Then as a newborn baby, it takes another 15 or 20 years to grow to completeness. In the same way, the spirit of Adam and Eve were born perfectly pure, no sin, no fallen nature, but their spirits needed to grow, their internal hearts, and their spirit needed to grow to completeness, which would happen, same time as their physical adulthood. And then the idea is that when Adam and Eve become complete, they really become engrafted to God in an unbreakable way. Still separate beings, but connected. But then something happened, the fall happened. That's also another long talk. Adam and Eve, along with Lucifer, the fallen angel. Angels are not perfect. They're imperfect beings. And so all three of them together, they abandoned God. So Adam and Eve were growing gradually. As they grew to perfection, they were increasingly becoming engrafted to God. But before that was complete, they unengrafted from God and instead engrafted to Lucifer. And the reason why the Satan is called wormwood in the Bible is because a living tree isn't wormwood. Wormwood describes a dead tree. So when a tree has died, it can no longer produce fruit or leaves or engage in osmosis or photosynthesis. So God is a living tree and Lucifer is a false god. Satan is a false god. So Adam and Eve were supposed to engraft to the tree of life, which is God, and get eternal life from receiving the nutrients and love. But instead they engrafted to a non-existent God, another being who was a dead end, dead wood. That's why this is expressed constantly throughout the Bible, this metaphor. That's why Aaron, who was Moses' brother, had a staff. And a staff is a branch cut from a tree, and it's no longer alive, it's just a piece of wood. But there was a miracle where the staff, it generated buds, it came back to life. And that's the metaphor of coming back from death to life. So Adam and Eve engrafted to Lucifer, and then all their lineage are born. That's what original sin means. They're born in that lineage. The lineage that has a dead end and no connection to life. So life can't be transmitted through that lineage to those people. And because those people can't receive that fostering energy of God's love and lineage from the false God, they're unable to grow spiritually and mesh with God directly. So that every generation is stuck in that process. And then the idea is that Jesus is produced through God refining, a bit like the movie Dune, but not genetically, more spiritually. God refined the Jewish people's lineages and made sure people like Ruth and Tamar, who had a really good lineage, could be blended into other good lineages. And over time, that compounded refinement produced a person who was able to become perfect, right? To transcend this stuck issue of being in a fallen lineage. And then when Jesus becomes perfect, other people can now engraft to him by rejecting their relationship to the false god Satan or even to the secular world. And that's why Jesus said you must hate your parents and love me. He didn't actually mean you should go home and be disgusted and hate your actual parents. He meant hate your parentage and your false lineage and engraft God's lineage through Jesus. So Jesus becomes like an umbilical cord. You see how the mechanics are starting to kick in now? It's not a legalistic statement, well, Jesus is the Messiah, so you've got to believe in him and then you can go to hell. But if you don't believe in him, you broke the rule and you go to heaven. Now we're starting to talk about things in a mechanics way. And it's more inspiring to understand the mechanics of how it works. So love is real, relationships are real, they're real connections. And the mechanics of it is God is the source of life, but God doesn't broadcast love like Wi-Fi. There has to be a relationship. And the love, the real substantial thing, has to go through real substantial channels. Just like the blood in your body needs veins, needs all those connections through vascular system. And so Adam and Eve created that false lineage together with Satan. And we're all trapped in that. And then when the Messiah comes, he becomes perfectly pure and perfect. And then he becomes one with God. So he's like, now here's more mechanics for you. He's like an umbilical cord. The baby growing in the mother's womb can't provide any life for itself. Even its immune system doesn't work yet. It can't breathe. It can't find food. So the mother is like God to the baby. And the mother refines all the oxygen in the food and processes the toxins out of the food while the baby's in the womb. And the baby is connected to the mother by the umbilical cord. And everything the baby needs comes through that physical, substantial connection. And so Jesus is like an umbilical cord for us to God. Jesus, a lot of Christians think Jesus is God. It's just not true. That's another discussion. But Jesus is the intermediary between us and God until we become perfect ourselves. So we engraft to Jesus by loving Jesus, appreciating Jesus, recognizing our need. And then because Jesus is already engrafted to God, indirectly, we are now engrafted to God. And through a loving relationship with Jesus, we can receive that nutrition of God's love so that we can make more effort to overcome sin and to grow spiritually. So you see, now we're thinking about it in a mechanical way. This is just one example. And if you think about these things in appreciating mechanics, then Jesus talks about engrafting, that he's a tree of life. It's probably a good idea to actually, which is what I did, go and study actual engrafting and actual trees. Not just what they look like, but the structure and function and purpose of trees. Understand osmosis, understand photosynthesis, understand, I learned this from Richard Feynman on a YouTube video, that most of a tree's substance comes about by absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. Understand all those things. And then when Jesus does talk about being a tree of life and engrafting to him, you can start to understand more things because you understand the mechanics. And it's not that it's this nice accidental poetry that engrafting to Jesus is similar to tree husbandry and engrafting branches of trees. It's that trees themselves, actual trees, and the human spirit and the human body are all expressions of the Logos. The Logos is the design, based on God as the template, the design of everything, how it works. So there is a design for tree structure, branching structure, and a tree is an expression of that design, and the human body is an expression. The vascular system or a tree with actually roots in the ground, they have very similar structure. Not accidentally, they're both expressions of that principle. And the way the spirit works is an expression of that principle. Even superclusters in the galaxy all have the same branching and root system, and it's just everywhere in nature, and it's everywhere in spiritual things. And so the reason why we have metaphors is because you might be familiar with one expression of a principle, but not with another one. So when somebody wants to explain the other thing, they say, that other thing which you already have knowledge of and experience and understand, well, this is based on the same principle. And suddenly, mind blown, you get a rush of understanding about this thing because you already understand the principles, how the other thing works, because they're both expressions of the same principle. If somebody had never seen a train before, but they really were familiar with cars, and then somebody said, well, a train kind of works like a car. Suddenly, all right, I understand. You have some energy source which turns the wheels, and the wheels cause it to go forward. Now you understand it without needing much more explanation. You've transferred that knowledge to something which is a different expression, but similar kind of principles. And so if we think about it, take it even further, then instead of just thinking of it legally, well, you've got to unengraft from Satan and your fallen lineage and engraft to Jesus as like a father, like a new lineage. And you've done that legal thing. You now love Jesus more than you loved your previous lineage. And so you're going to get the reward. You're going to go to heaven. But no, we have to think about it mechanically to understand it really. And so, for example, there's a verse in one of the reasons why Christians believe that, I am a Christian, but I have a different theology. I'm a unificationist. So one of the reasons Christians believe that Jesus was supposed to die is because, they came up with it after the fact, to cope with it. It's because they think, well, God could never make a mistake. So if it happened, it must have been God's will. But that's not what we see in the Old Testament. We see time and time and time again, God wanting something and demanding it and telling it and even threatening and still not getting what he wants. So it's not God's failure, but God failed to get what he wants. That's two different things. God didn't want Adam and Eve to fall. He told them not to do it. He told them they'd die if they did it spiritually, but they still did it. God did not get what he wants. So God wanted people to accept Jesus, and they weren't able to, and they killed him. And so God didn't get what he wanted in that situation. And so one way they come up with to show, oh well, it was already prophesied Jesus would get crucified, is they look at Isaiah 53, where it says, "He must be pierced for our transgressions." Now, if you don't think mechanically, if you just think legally or in terms of miracles, it's hard to counter that. Well, it is in the Old Testament, it is in Isaiah, it does say he must be pierced for our transgressions. And what did they do when they crucified him? They pierced his hands and feet. It's not clear if it was the wrists or hands, but he got pierced. But if you understand mechanically, you understand that, well, what actually happens when something is engrafted from one tree to another tree? And why do they engraft it? This tree is dying and sickly, but I want to rescue this sick branch. It's on the verge of death. But this tree is completely healthy. So if I can engraft this branch to this tree, it will be connected to the circulatory system of the healthy tree and come back to life. It will receive the food and water and starch energy it needs, and it will come back to life. But they don't just cut the sick branch off the dying and dead tree and glue it onto the bark of the healthy tree, right? What they do is they pierce the healthy tree first. They wound it, right? They have to cut into it. So it actually damages, and it's to the detriment of the tree. It can survive it, but they damage it and open up the bark and cut into it. And then, so the tree starts bleeding back. And then they prepare the branch of the dead tree. And then they stick it into the wound, then bandage the whole tree up. And then, over time, that branch can be accepted by the healthy tree and become fused. And, after a year or two, you can hang a swing from that branch, and it's just a part of that tree now. But if you think in the habit of thinking about the mechanics of how things work, you can see that when Jesus wants to engraft it to us, it means he has to accept us in a love relationship. Love relationships can be conjugal love, it can be a romantic love, it can be brother and sister love or parent-child love. So Jesus engrafts to us in a parent-child relationship. And when he does that, it's not enough just to be engrafted to Jesus, because the branch doesn't come back to life because it was stuck onto the tree. The branch comes back to life because there's a process of an intertwined circulatory system. And it's only by absorbing the nutrients from the healthy tree and exchanging them from all the sickness within yourself that you start to revive and come back to life. Now you're thinking about it mechanically, not just legally. Well, that was engrafted to the tree, so that's it, I'm saved. But actually, the branch that's taken from the fallen lineage, meaning the spiritual person, meaning me or anybody else, and engrafted to God through Jesus, if you do nothing after that, yeah, technically, you're now in God's lineage, but the condition of your soul hasn't changed or won't change at all. You'll still be just as dead spiritually. You'll still be just as rotten as you were on the other tree. You might as well still be on that tree. It's only, some Christians do have the phrase that you have to work out your salvation, and that shows a lot of insight and wisdom. And so it's through developing a relationship with God and Jesus and with Christian principles and changing your nature, making effort. Making effort is the way of saying engaging in that circulatory system, swapping out all the poison from yourself, from the goodness. And think about this is more troublesome to think about if you think about things in a mechanical way. Where does all the toxins from the sick, dead branch go after it's been engrafted to the healthy tree? It doesn't just evaporate, it doesn't just disappear by magic. It has to be taken in by the healthy tree, right? Because there's an exchange, right? There's an exchange of elements. And the healthy tree, because it's a healthy tree, it's able to process away, just like our physical body. Whenever we eat fruit or meat or vegetables, anything we eat has toxins and poison in it, actually. There's no such thing as pure organic food. Organic is just a word for less chemicals. But even the most healthy organic food kills us and poisons us. But what our body does is it separates off all the toxins by processing through our organs, separates them off from all the stuff that's compatible with us, flushes out through the bowel and bladder and pimples and sweat all the toxins, and uses and absorbs all the good stuff. And that's what a healthy tree does when when it has to do that exchange with all the gunk that's in the dying and dead branch, it has to receive all that poison and then give back purity. And so, might we consider that when we form this relationship with Jesus or any perfect person or and with God, that when we pray and make a good relationship with God and we really connect to God through our heart, that we actually poison God, just in the same way that God does the opposite to us. God's love to our soul is like antibiotics for the spirit. So, when you take antibiotics, it races through your body, just burning through all the toxins or the viruses, whatever it kills. And so God's love has the same effect on you. But you need a constant course of it, right? The more you have and constantly, it purifies you over time. I mean, I've been a person of faith for 40 years, and I haven't really progressed that much, to be honest. So that's my fault. But that's the principle of how it works. But as we receive God's pure love, and it becomes part of us, like when you eat food, some part of the energy from the food powers you. Some part of it is used to replace parts of your body. After 7 years, your entire body gets replaced. And so when we receive God's love, it energizes us, but it also starts to actually become part of our soul. But what God receives from us is our love. But because we're fallen, we're not able to purify the love before we give it, as God is. We give love, our fallen love. And some of that is mixed in with holy, good love. Some of it is mixed in with fallen nature. So God has to receive that. And just as our organs do with food, God has to first process all the impurities out of our love before God can willingly take what remains, what's purified, into his heart. So, hundreds of millions of people in the spirit world and this world, all the ones that do have some relationship to God, we're all poisoning God. But God is God, maximally great being. So who knows how much of a pain it is for God, how much of a detriment. But even God exists based on mechanics. There's a miracle, as I said, bookended. There's a miracle foundation and a miracle result. But even God has a mechanical process. That's what's meant by the Logos, the Word. The Word was with God. And so God himself, for example, doesn't have an infinite pool of love. God is an efficient being, so as new beings come into existence and form a relationship with God, God has an infinite capacity to generate love for that relationship. It wouldn't be wasteful, and also love is kind of like a perishable, right? It exists when it exists and when it's in action, when it's being used. So God is also a God who exists based on principles. And, mechanics is an uninspiring, blunt word to use, but I do prefer that word because it's easier to conceptualize. So God exists based on mechanical functions and based on principles, and everything, even spiritual things, and even love, and even salvation, can be understood in a mechanical way. The situation we're in, as I described, being in that fallen lineage, is a mechanical situation. To describe something as being cut off from God in a lineage is a mechanical problem. To describe something as the transmission of love through from your parents to you and from you to your children, it's a mechanical thing we're describing. It's not a legal thing, even though it can be described in legal languages. To describe the severing the connection to the fallen lineage and graft into God's lineage, it's all a mechanical description. So we should understand it in mechanical ways. But as I've said, in my passion and excitement since I had this epiphany about 15 years ago, I should be careful in explaining these things so that people don't just zero in on just understanding, well, it's all just, even the spirit, even God, even love, it's just mechanical things clunking around. That's not inspiring. So I've realized I have to try to, actually I thought about this making a cup of tea this morning, but I have to find a way to explain these things, but remind people just how miraculous mechanical things are, right? When I think about any technology now I've had some life experience and I have a bit of understanding. Even when I think about TVs that I used to watch when I was a kid, going back 40 or 50 years, even now it boggles my mind how magical they are. And I mean how magical the engineering and the supply chain and the manufacturing and even the design is. Right? I can look at anything simple like that and feel like it's all magic, basically. Everything's magic. here I am doing this whole YouTube channel trying to dissuade people from magical thinking. But in reality, everything is magical. It's just a way of understanding it in order to see the magic in it. But just because something's magical doesn't mean it doesn't have operational principles and mechanical structure and mechanical principles. So yeah, I think what I'm trying to do is put a layer of mechanics on top of the magic, not get rid of the magic or even the legal stuff. And because I feel like when we appreciate the mechanics, actually enhances our appreciation of the magic of things, the miraculous nature of things. I should use the word miraculous, not magical, but it enhances our understanding and more importantly, our emotional appreciation of those things. When I think of, for example, here's probably the best example of all. When I think about how God receives my love as a fallen person, even though it could be a detriment to God and God has to like energy to process and purify it before God can really consume my love. When I think about the fact that God's willing to poison himself in order that I might have a relationship with him, I might be able to receive his love, because love is not one way. God has to receive our love if we're going to receive his. It's just the way love is reciprocal. Then understanding that, instead of God just being, God, I hate it when atheists use the word sky daddy, but thinking of God in an infantile way, sky daddy God. Oh, God, when we're 4 or 5, 10 years old, people might think, my dad doesn't feel pain. What they actually think is my dad's numb, he's insensitive. But the dad is not strong because he doesn't feel anything. He's strong because even though he feels it, he continues doing what he needs to do. But when we're really young, we think not being able to feel something, if you stab somebody, it doesn't hurt. That's strength. That's not strength. That's actually detrimental. It's just being numb. But so if we think about, oh, God doesn't need anything, or God has everything he wants. God can never be feel anything difficult. It's just not true. If we betray ourselves or betray our friends or loved ones, God feels the most horrible pain at seeing that. So God can feel pain. And in a mechanical sense, if we give God our love and we're full of fallen nature, we can't purify it. That's what it means to be fallen. God has to purify that love before he can receive it. And so, but even knowing that all these millions of people will poison God in a certain way, not fatally, but to a certain way, even knowing that God's still willing to receive all our love. So that just gives an extra dimension of appreciation and love for God because of a mechanical way of understanding it on top of the miracles and the legal stuff. So yeah, I think the whole channel, almost every video I've done and going to do, is going to be to emphasize the mechanics of things, because I'm not an engineer or anything, but in the mechanics I see beauty and I see even the miraculous. And it's just a shame if we just stay stuck in this just looking for party trick miracles by prophets or just the legal stuff. And I see that in the Christian world. I read and watch a lot of debates and lectures about Christian ontology and theology and all those things, eschatology. And I see a lack of appreciation for grasping the mechanics of things. And I also see how it makes it difficult to understand things because of that lack of mechanics. And that's why my talk that I did earlier on my channel about the scientific meaning of the flaming sword, the flaming sword in the Garden of Eden, people think it says blocking Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. It doesn't say that. It says blocking Adam and Eve from the tree of life. And the tree of life is more of a principle. It means perfection. And well, it's more complicated than that, but I also have a video on that too, so go and watch that. So, to conclude, this is my mission, and I've always disliked the phrase calling, but I actually do feel a calling, because I'm so interested in this mechanics angle of understanding things, because I really believe without understanding them and appreciating the mechanics of everything, even spiritual things, it limits our understanding and it blocks us from understanding more deeply. And I have a video planned where I'm going to talk about the meaning of the burning bush. And it's all the insights come from because I looked at the mechanics of things, right? The mechanics of What is the difference between a bush and fruit and fire? And yeah, just to give you a preview, look at the amazing similar characteristics between fruit and fire. Both of them tap into their adjacent environment and tap into energy, and they both spread like in the same way. Like the bush drops fruit, and another bush grows, and another bush grows, and they're often even the same color, orange and yellow and red. But with fruit, the difference is as it spreads, creating a whole forest, it actually nurtures life. It protects from soil erosion. It gives an environment for birds and insects and all sorts of things, and it gives fruit for animals to eat, and it adds to the environment as it grows. Whereas fire is cannibalistic, it's parasitic. The only way it can exist and spread is by cannibalizing and destroying as it spreads. And so the reason why God, I'm giving the whole lecture, aren't I? The reason why God represented himself as a burning bush, well, the angel of Jehovah did, is because it's giving the message that Satan's way is a parasitic. And if Satan was like fire, it would just destroy and consume the bush. But God is like life-giving fruit, right? God multiplies and multiplies life. So even though you're seeing the fire in the bush, it didn't consume the bush. And so I'll go into more details in the talk I give on that. So yeah, it was by thinking in mechanical ways that I could come up with those insights. Same with the flaming sword talk. I even have a talk planned about the meaning of 666 in the Bible. Again, by understanding the mechanics and structure of things, I could see through lots of things that are a complete mystery in the Bible to give a good explanation. I won't give a preview of that because I'll just end up giving the whole talk. So, all right, this is I did promise in my channel update video from a few weeks ago that I was just going to jump in front of the camera, train myself to do that, and just give the talks. And so this is one of them. I didn't have any notes. I didn't have any slides or anything. It's just stuff I've been thinking about for a long time. And so once I set off, yeah, it turns out I can give a talk in a fairly structured way. Afterwards, I might think, oh, I should have said this or I should have said that. But in reality, I think I don't do too bad. So I just need to get over my shyness and be willing to just get in front of the camera and talk about these things. And so in future, I'll give a talk with more presentation, a bit more polish about this mechanics thing, because it's really important. And I think also I gave some examples about lineage and grafting, but I think there are so many other great examples I could give, which could really win people over to thinking about mechanics. So that's my talk, and please subscribe on the channel. I don't have many subscribers. It's my fault. I haven't been uploading that much. I've got about 10-15 videos. I've got a lot more to come. And so I'm in the process of publishing a children's book, an audiobook at the moment. Yeah, please subscribe, and then leave a comment if you've got any observations or any examples of your own about thinking about understanding things in the physical world or mechanic principles which help you understand the Bible or God or your spiritual life. It would be great to hear from you on that. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, which I think will be a video. I like William Lane Craig's talks, but I disagree with him on quite a few things. And so, yeah, it'll be a talk, not so much refuting what he said, but giving a different point of view and a different angle on something he talked about recently. So I'll see you there soon. Thanks.